Take my bride, let's go for a ride in my newfangled automobile. Just where we will go, nobody knows, but it's sure a great way to feel. Behind the wheel of the speed meter steel, it's my newfangled automobile.
Hello and welcome to Vintage Car History. I'm Wild Bill. Since the invention of the wheel, mankind has been making vehicles to accomplish meaningful work. Commercial vehicles move people and cargo. Utility vehicles get specialized jobs done, while the humble personal car also does meaningful work, moving you and your household to and fro about your business. And yet, there are those vehicles that are used and even designed to accomplish meaningful play. These are the recreational vehicles. Before we dive in, let's define a recreational vehicle for the purposes of this video. To be one, the vehicle needs to be used for one of two things: sporting activities or leisure activities. It can be purpose-built for recreation or repurposed from a working vehicle. Regarding recreational activities, races are a common example of sporting types. Leisure-oriented vehicles support non-competitive hobbyist activities such as camping, cycling, touring, exploring, and other such. And it should come as no surprise that the line between these two is often blurry, for it was so from the beginning. The chariot is the earliest vehicle that we presently know of that was commonly used for recreational purposes. It was used in ancient times for both sports and leisure. Initially designed as a battlefield weapon, the racing of war chariots against each other soon followed, though personally I suspect the whole idea of it probably came from some rather undisciplined Greek army charioteers. In any case, chariot racing was a very popular spectator sport for some 1,000 years or so. Indeed, by the height of the Roman Empire, chariots were being specifically designed and built for racing instead of war, certainly a candidate for the title of first purpose-built recreational vehicle. Yet chariots were also used for leisure, at least by those kings, emperors, and high nobles that could afford to ride around town in one. And some of the earliest depictions of chariot use outside of warfare is in the leisure activity of hunting. Hunting large game from a chariot with a spear or bow and arrow was all the rage for Egyptian pharaohs some 3,000 years ago, and the practice spread from there across the Middle East and into Europe. This was truly a leisure activity. These hunters on wheels were not in competitive sport, but rather were enjoying one of the trophy hobbies available to the ancient elite. Chariots eventually would become obsolete in warfare. Though their use in sports would last a bit longer, they would be pretty much extinct by the 8th century AD, the chariot itself being discarded in favor of just sitting on the horse. Sporting vehicles wouldn't be seen on a large scale again until the 19th century. But recreational vehicles of the leisure type did continue on into the Middle Ages, though these were definitely not chariots. The earliest forms of carriages date back to the Roman Empire some 2,000 years ago. These four-wheeled, horse-drawn wagons were designed to carry their occupants in the finest luxury that Rome could offer. Now, to be fair, these Roman carriages were limited in their use under Roman law. Wheeled vehicles were not allowed in Roman cities during business hours without a special permit. But those in power could get such permits, and these folks would often use them for special events, festivals, and holiday celebrations. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, those long-standing laws were no longer enforced, and by the days of Charlemagne, fine luxury carriages could be found on the streets of cities across Europe and beyond. Yet they, like chariots, remained beyond the reach of the common man. If you owned a carriage during the Middle Ages, you were probably noble and also owned one or more estates. These nobles did, of course, use their carriages for meaningful work as the transport needed to conduct business, but they would often use these carriages and even have carriages specially made to use as leisure vehicles. From the 8th century through to the 19th, the upper crust society of the civilized world took off in their carriages to go on various recreational outings, such as a picnic or a tour of the countryside. This was particularly popular amongst the noblewomen of the period. A countess would be driven to her friend's castle, and the two could go for a ride in the carriage and share gossip. The horses and various sounds of the carriage would, in theory, keep their conversation private, even from the driver. Indeed, by the 13th century, touring carriages were made as coaches with enclosed bodies for the passengers, specifically to keep the driver from hearing the juiciest tidbits. The Industrial Revolution caused innumerable changes to society, and by the late 19th century, vehicles of many types were owned by nobles and commoners alike. Bicycles were amongst these vehicles and were often used as recreational vehicles for both sport and leisure. Of course, bikes proved quite versatile for mundane work as a personal commuter transport, a small delivery vehicle, or for in-city courier services. Yet by the 1870s, bike races were popping up all over Europe, and like the chariots of old, racing vehicles were back and here to stay. Manufacturers would sponsor their racers and design their bikes to be as light and fast as possible. And they still do to this day. But cycling can also be a leisure activity. Touring by bike also grew in the 1870s, and cycle tours became a very popular group activity at all social levels across Europe. Many of these tours would have other activities also planned for the tour. Perhaps a picnic, a swim, a museum visit, or even some skate shoeing. And of course, some folks just like to go off on their own tour, enjoying the time, view, and exercise riding their bike. Additionally, off-road cycling is a competitive sport, as well as a common leisure activity. Many bike manufacturers build bikes specifically designed for this kind of touring and racing, light yet rugged, able to take the pounding of the trail or lack thereof. It was in the mid-1800s that another leisure vehicle began to appear, the caravan or travel trailer. These first appeared in Britain around 1850s and were the creation of families of Romanian itinerant laborers known at the time as gypsies. These people made their wagons, or vardo as they called them, to be lived in themselves. Prior to that time, their wagons were just held their tents and supplies as the family moved from one job to another. A vardo was well equipped with beds, heating, lockable cabinets, a small kitchen, porches to relax on, all the comforts of home on wheels. By the 1880s, the idea of having a small home to keep with you while out touring started to get traction in Europe, Britain, and the USA. Many makers of horse-drawn wagons partnered up with coach builders to create the first recreational travel trailers. These caravans often had amenities that the earlier Vado did not offer, for example, a toilet. And they were not intended to be a permanent home, but a temporary one while out on tour. These recreational vehicles slowly grew in popularity over the next few decades, and by 1910 could be made to order, providing whatever support needed for your preferred touring activities. Now, in the mid-1890s, motorcycles and cars began to appear in the wild in significant numbers, and when these creatures met in the wild, there would typically be a race. Car and motorcycle racing as sports quickly became regulated and categorized. By World War I, there were racing circuits, tracks, and courses all over the world, and hundreds of organizations hosted racing of all kinds. Cars of all sizes, trucks, motorcycles, off-road stuff. I mean, if it had an engine and could move, there would be a place to race it. And this is true today. If you want to build or get a race car and race it, you can do so just about anywhere. And your race car is a recreational sports vehicle. Cars and motorcycles began to serve as leisure vehicles also from the 1890s and beyond. At first, they were used much the same as bicycles were for touring and associated touring activities. However, by 1910, the technology for engines and drive chains had advanced enough that cars, trucks, and even motorcycles could be made to support and move much more weight than just themselves and their passengers. And one particular car maker, Pierce Arrow, took one of their cars, a Model 66, and created the world's first motorhome in 1910. This was a big car, and the motorhome was well equipped. Beds, cabinet, table and chairs, a small privy, the works. This RV had camping in mind. Theodore Roosevelt was making national parks like crazy, and this sparked an interest in camping nationwide. The Pierce Arrow motorhome was perfect for the explorer of the time and have been built by other manufacturers ever since. In the USA, when one thinks of an RV, it is usually one of these that comes to mind. And many of them are specialized for whatever recreation you want to enjoy. Some have garages, sections that expand, outdoor kitchens. The list is long. Another thing that more powerful cars meant to the world was the ability to have a car or small truck pull a caravan, which began in earnest right after World War I. Throughout the 1920s, companies that built horse-drawn travel trailers began to make them to fit onto a ball hitch or small fifth-wheel axle. And since these trailers were not being used for commercial purposes, most states did not require any special licensing to use one. Most still don't, for that matter. One of the most famous and certainly longest-standing maker of these travel trailers is Airstream. A Mr. Wally Byam founded the company in Los Angeles in 1929, but it was in 1936 that he gave the world the Clipper, that classic Art Deco polished aluminum torpedo-looking thing that became iconic with American camping through to the 1980s, and this company still exists today. Many trailers, and motorhomes as well for that matter, are designed to carry other smaller recreational vehicles. Typically, these are vehicles that either cannot or are not legal to operate on a road. Motorcycles have, of course, been around as long as cars have, and have smaller engines, and from the early days have been used for touring. But their engine power continued to grow, and by the 1920s, engine technology was able to power a wide variety of small recreational vehicles. Snowmobiles, small boats, rugged off-road motorcycles, and such. Today's toy carriers might carry jet skis or rock crawlers or just about anything that moves, and we've been doing it for over a century now, using our cars, trucks, and trailers to move our toys around with. Now, I'll admit that most folks probably wouldn't look at a modern Formula One race car and call it a recreational vehicle, but it is one. And for the person that drives it, it's, his work, or her work for that matter. But that car is designed for one thing only: to race, to be a piece of equipment used in competitive sports. And at many great car races, you will see along the track people in and even on their motorhomes and travel trailers, grilling their lunch and watching the race. And all involved are using their recreational vehicles to accomplish meaningful play. Thanks for watching Vintage Car History, and we'll see you next week. Peace.